Hello, cow watchers. I'm going to read you something from George MacDonald, which, if you don't know who that is, it's somebody that inspired C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. It's always been a favorite of mine as well. So settle in for a bedtime story. The Light Princess by George MacDonald. Read by M.P. Temple. 1. What? No children? Once upon a time, so long ago that I have quite forgotten the date, there lived a king and a queen who had no children. And the king said to himself, "All the queens of my acquaintances have children, some 3, some 7, and some as many as 12, and my queen has not one. I feel ill-used." So he made up his mind to be cross with his wife about it. But she bore it like a good patient queen as she was. The new king grew very cross indeed, but the queen pretended to take it all as a joke, and a very good one too. "Why don't you have any daughters at least?" said he. "I don't say sons, that might be too much to expect." "I'm sure, dear king, I am very sorry," said the queen. "You ought to be," retorted the king. "You are not going to make a virtue of that, surely." But he was not an ill-mannered king, and in any matter of less moment would have let the queen have her own way with all of his heart. This, however, was an affair of state. The queen smiled. "You must have patience with the lady, you know, dear king," said she. She was, indeed, a very nice queen, and heartily sorry that she could not oblige the king immediately. 2. Won't I just... The king tried to have patience, but he succeeded very badly. It was more than he deserved, therefore, when at last the queen gave him a daughter, as lovely a little princess as ever cried. The day drew near when the infant must be christened. The king wrote all the invitations with his own hand. Of course, someone was forgotten. Now, it does not generally matter if somebody is forgotten, only you must mind who. Unfortunately, the king forgot without intending to forget, so the chance fell upon the princess Make-Me-Know-It, which was awkward, for the princess was the king's own sister, and he'd not have to forgot her. But she had made herself so disagreeable to the old king, their father, that he had forgotten her in making his will, so it was no matter that her brother forgot her in writing his invitations. But poor relations don't do anything to keep you in mind of them. Why don't they? The king could not see into the garret she lived in, could he? She was a sour, spiteful creature. The wrinkles of content crossed the wrinkles of peevishness, and made her face as full of wrinkles as a pat of butter. If ever a king could be justified in forgetting anybody, this king was justified in forgetting his sister, even at a christening. She looked very odd, too. Her forehead was as large as the rest of her face, and projected over it like a precipice. When she was angry, her little eyes flashed blue. When she hated anybody, they showed yellow and green. What they looked like when she loved anyone, I do not know, for I never heard of her loving anyone but herself, and I do not think she could have managed that if she had not somehow gotten used to herself. But what made it highly imprudent to the king to forget her was that she was awfully clever. In fact, she was a witch, and when she bewitched anyone, he very soon had enough of her, for she beat all the wicked fairies in the wickedness, and all the clever ones in the cleverness. She despised all the modes we read of in history, which offended fairies and witches have taken their revenges, and therefore, after waiting and waiting in vain for an invitation, she made up her mind at last to go without one, and make the whole family miserable, like a princess as she was. So she put on her best gown, went to the palace, and was kindly received by the happy monarch, who forgot that he had forgotten her, and took her place in the procession at the royal chapel. When they were all gathered about the front, she contrived to get next to it, and threw something into the water, after which she maintained a very respectful demur until the water was applied to the child's face. But at that moment, she turned around in her place 3 times, and muttered the following words, loud enough for those beside her to hear. Light of spirit by my charms, light of body every part, never weary human arms, only crush thy parents' heart. They all thought she had lost her wits and was repeating some foolish nursery rhyme, but a shudder went through the whole of them notwithstanding. The baby, on the contrary, began to laugh and crow, while the nurse gave a start and smothered cry, for she thought she was struck with paralysis. She could not feel the baby in her arms, but she clasped it tight and said nothing. The mischief was done. 3. She can't be ours. The first awkwardness that resulted from this unhappy privatation was that the moment the nurse began to float the baby up and down, she flew from her arms towards the ceiling. Happily, the resistance of the air brought her a ascended philosopher and knew all the ins and outs of laws and gravitation as well as the ins and outs of her bootlace. And being a witch as well, she could abroge the laws in a moment, or at least so clog in their wheels and rust their bearings that they could not work at all. But we have more to do than what followed than how it was done. The first awkwardness that resulted from this unhappy privatation was the moment the nurse began to float the baby up and down, she flew from her arms towards the ceiling. Happily, the resistance of the air brought her ascending career to a close with the foot of it. She remained horizontal as when she left her nurse's arms, kicking and laughing amazedly. The nurse, in terror, flew to the bell and begged the footman, who answered it, to bring up the house's step directly. Trembling in every limb, she climbed upon the steps and had to stand upon the very top and reach up before she could catch the floating tail of the baby's long clothes. When the strange fact came to be known, there was a terrible commotion in the place. The occasion of its discovery by the king was naturally a repetition of the nurse's experience. Astonished, he felt no weight when the child lay in his arms. He began to wave her up and not down, for she slowly ascended to the ceiling as before, and there remained floating in perfect comfort and satisfaction, as was tested by her pearls of tiny laughter. The king stood up, staring in speechless amazement, and trembled so his beard shook like grass in the wind. At last, turning to the queen, who was just as horror-struck as himself, he said, gasping, staring, and stammering, "She can't be ours, queen." Now, the queen was much cleverer than the king, and had begun already to suspect that this effective defense came by cause. "I am sure she is ours," answered she, "but we ought to have taken better care of her at the christening. People who were never invited ought not to have been present." "Oh ho," said the king, tapping his forehead with his forefinger. "I have it all. I found her out. Don't you see it, queen? Princess Make-em-know-it has bewitched her." "That's what I just said," answered the queen. "I beg your pardon, my love. I did not hear you." For he was a little king with a great throne, like many other kings. The throne steps were brought and set up upon the dining table, and John got on top of them. But he could not reach the little princess, who lay like a baby laughter cloud in the air, exploding continuously. "Take the tongs, John," said his majesty, and getting up on the table, he handed them to him. John could reach the baby now, and the little princess was handed down by the tongs. 4. Where is she? One fine summer day, a month after her first adventures, during which time she had been very carefully watched, the princess was lying on the bed in the queen's own chamber, fast asleep. One of the windows was open, for it was noon, and the day was so sultry that the girl was wrapped in nothing less eternal than slumber itself. The queen came into the room, and not observing that the baby was on the bed, opened another window. A frolicsome fairy wind, which had been watching for a chance of mischief, rushed in at the one window, and taking its way over the bed where the child was laying, caught her up, and rolling and floating her along like a piece of flue or dandelion seed, carried her with it through the opposite window and away. The queen went downstairs, quite ignorant of the loss she had herself occasioned. When the nurse returned, she supposed that Her Majesty had carried her off and, dreading a scolding, delayed making inquiry about her, and went at length to the Queen's boudoir, where she found Her Majesty. "Please, Your Majesty, shall I take the baby?" said she. "Where is she?" asked the Queen. "Please forgive me, I know it was wrong." "What do you mean?" said the Queen, looking grave. "Oh, don't frighten me, Your Majesty," exclaimed the nurse, clasping her hands. The Queen saw that something was amiss and fell down in a faint. The nurse rushed about the palace screaming, "My baby! My baby!" Everyone ran to the Queen's room, but the Queen could give no orders. They soon found out, however, that the princess was missing, and in a moment the palace was like a beehive in a garden. And in 1 minute more the Queen was brought to herself by the great shout and clapping of hands. They had found the princess fast asleep under a rose bush, to which the elvish little wind puff had carried her, finishing its mischief by shaking a shower of red rose leaves all over the little white sleeper. Startled by the noise the servants made, she woke, and, furious with glee, scattered the rose leaves in all directions, like a shower of spray in the sunset. She was watched more careful after this, no doubt. Yet it would be endless to relate all the odd incidents resulting from this peculiarity of the young princess. But there was never a baby in a house, not to say a palace, that kept the household in such constant good humor, at least not below stairs. If it was not easy for her nurses to hold her, at least she made neither their arms nor their hearts ache. And she was so nice to play ball with. There was positively no danger of letting her fall. They might throw her down or knock her down or push her down, but they couldn't let her down. It is true that they might let her fly into the fire or a coal hole or through the window, but none of these accidents had happened as of yet. If you heard peals of laughter resounding from some unknown region, you might be sure enough of the cause. Going down into the kitchen or the room, or you would find Jane and Thomas and Robert and Susan, all in sum, playing ball with the little princess. She was the ball herself, and did not enjoy it the less for that. Away she went, flying from one to the other, screeching with laughter, and the servants loved the ball itself better than the game. But they had to take some care how they threw her, for if she received an upward direction, she would never come down again without being fetched. 5. What is to be done? But above stairs, it was different. One day, for instance, after breakfast, the king went into his counting house and counted out his money. The operation gave him no pleasure. "To think," he said to himself, "that every one of these gold sovereigns weighs 1/4 of an ounce, and my real, life, flesh and blood princess weighs nothing at all." He hated his gold sovereigns, as they lay with a broad smile of self-satisfaction all over their yellow faces. The Queen was in the parlor, eating bread and honey, but at the second mouthful she burst out crying and could not swallow it. The King heard her sobbing. Glad of anyone, but especially of his Queen, to quarrel with, he clasped his gold sovereigns into his money box, clapped his crown on his head, and rushed into the parlor. "What is this all about?" exclaimed he. "What are you crying for, Queen?" "I can't eat it," said the Queen, looking rueful at the honey pot. "No wonder," retorted the King. "You have just eaten your breakfast, 2 turkey eggs, 3 anchovies." "Oh, that's not it," sobbed Her Majesty. "It's my child. My child." "Well, what's the matter with your child? She's neither up the chimney nor down the draw-well. Just hear her laughing." Yet the King could not help a sigh, which he tried to turn into a cough, saying, "It is a good thing to be light-hearted, I am sure, whether she's ours or not." "Bad thing to be light-headed," answered the Queen, looking with prophetic soul far into the future. "'Tis a good thing to be light-handed," said the King. "'Tis a bad thing to be light-fingered," answered the Queen. "'Tis a good thing to be light-footed," said the King. "'Tis a bad thing," began the Queen. The King interrupted her. "In fact," he said, with the tone of one who concludes an argument in which he had only imaginary opponents, and in which, therefore, he has come off triumphant, "in fact, it is a good thing altogether to be light-bodied." But it is a bad thing altogether to be light-minded, retorted the queen, who was beginning to lose her temper. The last answer quite discomforted his majesty, who turned on his heel and betook himself to his counting-house again. But he was not halfway through it when the voice of his queen overtook him. "And it's a bad thing to be light-haired," screamed she, determined to have more last words, now that her spirit was roused. The queen's hair was black as night, and the king had been, and his daughter's was, golden as morning. But it was not this reflect on his hair that arrested him. It was the double use of the word light, for the king hated all witticisms, and punning especially. And besides, he could not tell whether the queen meant light-haired or light-haired. For why might she not aspire her vows when she was exasperated herself? He turned upon his other heel and rejoined her. She looked angry still, because she knew that she was guilty, or, what was much the same, knew that he thought so. "My dear queen," said he, "duplicity of any sort is exceedingly objectionable between married people of any rank, not to say kings and queens, and the most objectionable form duplicity can assume is that of punning." "There," said the queen, "I never made a jest, but I broke it in the making. I am the most unfortunate woman in the world." She looked so rueful that the king took her in her arms, and they sat down to consult. "Can you bear this?" said the king. "No, I can't," said the queen. "Well, what's to be done?" said the king. "I'm sure I don't know," said the queen. "But might you not try an apology?" "To my elder sister, I suppose you mean," said the king. "Yes," said the queen. "Well, I don't mind," said the king. So he went the next morning to the house of the princess, and, making very humble apology, begged her to undo the spell. But the princess declared, with a grave face, that she knew nothing at all about it. Her eyes, however, shone pink, which was a sign that she was happy. She advised the king and queen to have patience and to mend their ways. The king returned disconsolate. The queen tried to comfort him. "We will wait till she's older. She may then be able to suggest something herself. She will know at least how she feels and explain things to us." "But what if she should marry?" exclaimed the king in sudden consternation at the idea. "Well, what of that?" rejoined the queen. "Just think, if she were able to have children." "Just think, if she were to have children. In the course of 100 years, the air might be as full of floating children as gossamers in autumn." "That is no business of ours," replied the queen. "Besides, by that time they will have learned to take care of themselves." A sigh was the king's only answer. He would have consulted the court physicians, but he was afraid that they would try experiments upon her.